Hi guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial on creating a featured image slider using ASP.NET Core and Angular 8. In the last video tutorial, we created our model classes, which is gallery image and gallery. Now in this video tutorial, we will create our class, which is required to communicate with our database. We are going to create our database using Entity Framework Core's code first method or approach. So first go ahead and create a folder inside your featured image gallery project and call this folder as data. Inside data, we will add a new C# class and we will call this as application DB context. Application DB context is the class that will help us to communicate with our database. Let's go ahead and add our using statements that we would require. So these are all the assembly references and the model class references that you will need. So add them here. So next thing that we want to do is inherit our application DB context class from DB context. I'm sure you guys must be thinking that if you have watched my previous video tutorials that I have used identity DB context instead of DB context. That's because in this phase of this video tutorials, we are not implementing a membership system. Therefore, we don't require the additional tables for users, user roles, therefore for tokens. So therefore, we don't need to implement or inherit from the DB context class or from the identity DB context class. So what I'm doing here is just inheriting from the DB context class for this phase of the project. And when we will implement memberships on the same project, then we will change it. So for now, just stick to DB context. Next thing that we want to do is add a constructor. And inside the constructor, we need to pass the base options for our DB context. So our DB context class requires us to pass some base options to instantiate the connection with the database. Therefore, what we want to do here is use the DB context option property and then pass our application DB context options to the base constructor. That should be it. So when this class is instantiated, the communication options will be passed to our base class. Next thing, what we want to do is all the required DB sets entities. So we need to create all the entity database sets that we would need to communicate. So whichever DB sets we will create here, Entity Framework Core will create a database table for it. So first one that we require for this is the DB set for gallery, and let's call this as galleries. Second one that we require is the DB set for gallery images, and we'll call this as gallery images. Make sure you have the assembly references so you don't get any errors. So now Entity Framework Core will create two tables for us in the database. One is for galleries, one is for gallery images, and it will automatically add the foreign key association between these two tables. Now, the next thing that we want to do is let's specify all our options, that is the connection string to communicate with the database. So let's go to application app settings.json file. Here, let's add another property, call it as connection strings, and the value we will specify here for our connection string is, we'll give it a key, we'll call it as default connection. The name of the value for default connection will be the value that we will use to connect to our SQL server. So If you have not yet downloaded Azure Data Studio, I recommend you to download Azure Data Studio. And if you have not watched the first video tutorial where I have recommended you to follow the setup, if you have followed that video, you should have a setup like this where you have Kitematic and Azure Data Studio. Connect to your SQL Server instance, start your container, and you can see here that you are running communicating with your server on port 1433, and you can add your password. So now once you have Azure Data Studio, you can see the contents of your server. You can see all the databases. Now for the connection string, we need to specify the following. So I've added the connection string that is required. Oh, this should be here, sorry. So the connection string. So first option here is the server, which is localhost, and I just showed you on your Azure Data Studio GUI that it is localhost. The next thing that you want to do is the port number. That's 1433. Your database. So here for the database value, here I have said it's featured image gallery DB. So which means that when the database is created, ASP.NET Core will use this specific name for that database. So database with the name featured image gallery DB will be created. So whatever name you want to give your database, you can specify it here. Then for the user, you will put it as system admin because that's the user I'm using, or that's the user currently I have. If you have any other user, you can provide that username. And finally, for the password, you'll use your password that you use to connect to your server or database. So that's it. And now let's save this. We are done with the default connection string. Now when the application starts, we need to make sure that our application connects to the database and starts the communication. So in ASP.NET Core, the first thing that it is going to look for when the application runs is the startup class, and everything inside the startup class is executed. Okay, so all the services that you require are executed here, or initialized or instantiated. So now here inside your configure services method, what we want to do is we want to add a service to the pipeline that will connect to the database when the application runs. So to connect to the database, use the services object. So services dot add db context, and the name of the class that contains the db context value. So it's application db context. Add our missing reference. So let's add our missing reference here using featured data. So application db context, and then we will specify the options, because when we, as you know, when we instantiate this, we need to provide the constructor will be executed, and we need to provide the options to the base constructor. So here is where we will provide those options. So the options is basically the connection string to connect to the database. So using some lambda expressions, options dot, we will use the use SQL server method, and here we will specify all the options to connect to our database. So now the first thing that we want to do is add our reference to using statement, which is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, as this method is a part of the Microsoft Entity Framework Core assembly. And now we are getting this error because we have not specified the options, because that is required in the parameters of this method. So where do we get these options from? We get it from this connection string that we just created. So let's use the configuration object dot get connection string. And where do we get this connection string from? So we don't have to specify the file name, which is app.settings.json, because it will go and search in the app.settings.json file for your connection string. All you have to do is specify the key for the connection string, and the key for the connection string is default connection. So we put it here. So it will go and search for a key with the name default connection string and get the value. So now we have added the uh, initialize the service here now in the pipeline. So as soon as the application runs, the communication to the server will be done. Now the next thing that we want to do is go and open a terminal and make sure that we are in the project folder. And now we will run the following commands entity to create our database using entity framework code's code first approach. So this is our first migration, that is the first table that we are going to create. So let's type .NET entity framework, that's EF migrations add, and here we will specify a name for our migrations. It's our initial migrations. We are going to call it InitialCreate and then hit enter. Now it's going to process the command and it's going to create a folder called as migrations, and then inside the migrations folder you will see some classes created. You'll see some numbers, which is the timestamp when the file was created, and the name of the file. So if you open initial create file, you will see some code. This is basically the query or the link query that will be executed here using entity framework code to create the tables. So it's going to create a table called as galleries, and it's also going to create a table called as gallery images. Now what we want to do is we have just run the initial command to add the migrations. The database has not yet been created. So if you refresh, you will see no database called as featured image gallery yet created. In order to create the database and to execute this query, we will run the following command. So let's type .NET EF, which is entity framework, database update, and the name of your migration, which was initial create, or the name, whichever name you used. So you can hit enter, and now entity framework core will create the database and the required tables by executing this query. So anything inside the up method will be executed, any query. So it says that it's completed creating, executing the query. So now if we go to Azure Data Studio, and here if we refresh our databases, we should have a new database created called as featured image gallery. And if we open this and look at the tables, we will see we have three tables. One's for the migration history, which contains all the history related to the migrations that you have done, new tables that you have added, or you have removed any tables or columns. Now second two tables that you see is the galleries and gallery images. That was the tables that were created using the following query, and all the columns inside the table are basically the properties that we created for gallery and gallery images. Now the relation between these two tables is also created. You will see there's a primary key added, and if you go to the keys and the constraints, if you go to the keys, you'll see there's a primary key for DB galleries, and if you go to DB gallery images, you will see there is a foreign key which is gallery images. So the relation between these two tables is created by entity framework code, and the way it was created by this virtual property that we created over here for gallery and for gallery images. So that should be it for this video tutorial. We have successfully created our required database that is needed to store the information related to our featured image slider, that's the images and the gallery. So the next video tutorial, we will create all the web APIs, start creating the web APIs to add the new image gallery, to delete and to edit the gallery. So thank you for watching. All the code will be available in the DevOps repo. The link is in the video description. If you have any questions, use the comment section. Once again, please like and subscribe my channel Tech Howdy.